Hi everyone, Sandra Duran Wilson here, and welcome to this week's Mixed Media Soul Sparks. Every week I try to bring you some new ideas to jumpstart your mixed media paintings, give you some inspiration for where you may take your next series or work. And this week I want to talk about color. And Analogous Palette is when you have, most of you probably know this, it's the colors that are adjacent on the color wheel. So maybe you go red, violet, violet, blue, violet, or over in here. And what I want to look at today is more what I call the soothing blue, kind of analogous blue to green palette. And I've got a lot of different colors in here that I've mixed. And you could actually just take two and play with them with adding in some black or the complementary color. So if I wanted to neutralize a bright blue, I would add a little bit of orange, and that's going to make my blue more neutral. And let me just show you that on here. So the reason I kept this orange and this yellow is because when you look at this palette, like I've got this range of blues to greens in here, and this orange and this yellow mixture is my little bit of pop. It's that warm color that's going to come in. And you always want to have, just even if it's a little tiny dot somewhere, just to liven up that palette. Might be a line, might be just a little area. And I'm also going to show you how to bring in some neutrals to really accentuate that palette. But first I just wanted to show you this blue neutralizing effect. And this is Payne's Gray. And I have this experiment going with Payne's Gray. Like this is a tri-art. Golden has their own Payne's Gray. Every time I buy a Payne's Gray, it's actually a different color. This one's pretty dark, so let's just try adding a little white to it. You can still see how dark it is, but if I take a tiny bit of the orange, it's going to really neutralize it. I'm going to bring some of this in. So you see how it's almost kind of a blue-gray, which Payne's Gray is typically a kind of a gray-blue, but the difference here you can see with the orange. Let's try it with this teal. It's a little diluted. You can see how this nice bright blue. Now, let me add just a tiny drop of orange to it. And you'll see how much it neutralizes it. So that's what I mean by you can get this wide range of blues and greens. Now what I did here is I took, starting with my greens, and I'm just going to pop this over here, and let's just start. Do you see how I've kind of, on the plastic, I've drawn in some shapes of where my colors may go? I usually do that, and then I completely disregard it, so it's really not necessary. But I want to come in and kind of get some background colors in. I'm working on a pastel board, which has a really beautiful tooth, and it's going to hold this really wet paint. I'm going to come in here, and you can see how you can start to get these gradations just by letting the paint mix itself. I'm going to pour some white into here. I'm going to use my knife to pull these colors up. Isn't that beautiful with just adding that little bit of white? Now this is a Holbein white, and it actually does this kind of beautiful, almost cellular, when you bring it into another wet paint. See how it starts to create these little movements, almost like water. I had a completely different idea of where this was going to go, but now it's changing. So that's what I said. I draw those shapes on there, and then these things begin to change. This was a viridian green, and as I bring this over, I'm going to add some more white, a little water, and again I'm going to bring the knife and now let's get a little more white here, and this is a yellow-green. And you're going to notice how this changes when it's in the full body or the mass body color compared to when I bring in this white. You see how it becomes like a yellow. Now I can start to bring in the brush and begin to actually mix some of these. That's getting a little dull. It's becoming more of a neutral. So I'm going to wipe some of that off. And I want to neutralize it more. I'm going to bring just some white into there. There we go. It was starting to look a little too muddy in that area, but if I start to bring it over into here, so that little pop of color right there can give it a different feeling. Now, I'll continue to play with these colors up into here, bring some of that. You always want to bring some of this color that you've got going on here up into some other areas to begin to tie it together. Using my knife, I'm picking up some of that viridian green, and I pull that up. I'm getting a different kind of blue. So this is working with an analogous palette. You know these colors are going to flow together because they're all right next to each other on the color wheel. And we know with composition that your eye is going to go to the place of the darkest dark next to the lightest light. So I'm going to create a point right in here, which is going to be like an entry point, because this is going to become a very light color next to a very dark color. And I can repeat that over into here. I love painting with my knife. I'll come back in later and paint with the brush, but it's almost like drawing an arrow of how the eye gets directed around the painting when you begin to bring the darks and the lights around here. Now let me just show you what happens when you add just a tiny bit of this warmer color, the orange and the yellow. And then I'll talk about a couple of ideas where you could take this next. Now I've got this blue in here, so if I take this yellow right into here, just a tiny, tiny bit of it, come in with some orange on top, and it's almost like that tiny little bit of color. Boom, your eye goes right to that. Now if I bring some more up into here, it doesn't take much of that color, but you do want to repeat it somewhere else. And see where it's dark against dark there? It doesn't pop so much, but where it's next to a lighter color, it will. Let me just clean that off. Get some of this over here. It helps if it's dry before I move into the next layer. But let's bring some of this over in. Yeah. So do you see how that warms it up? Otherwise it stays really cool. I could come in and just leave a little bit of that peeking through. And this is working with an analogous palette. I could develop it more along this whole gradation if I wanted, getting some of these darker greens. what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and then I can come back in with a stencil even. And once the painting is dry, I can bring a stencil back in and use a cosmetic wedge and come back in and add maybe some more of the darks over this yellow. And that's really going to give it this push-pull. So that is the color idea for this week. I'd like you to pick an analogous color palette that you want to work with. It could be in the reds and then you add a little bit of cool, or it could be like this one where it's the blues and greens and you add that little bit of warmth to it, or the zinger, and just play with it and let's see what you come up with. So thanks for joining me this week, and I will see you next week. Join the Creative Awakening community on Facebook, where you'll be able to post your art, connect with other creatives around the world, and ask questions. Use the hashtag #MixedMediaSoulSparks when posting your work on social media. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next week.